Playing Possum Podcast.
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 Playing Possum Podcast. Yeah. I was like, there's a bagel in the toaster, and then I put Nutella on it, and now I'm eating it.
Nice. Is it just a plain bagel or?
Yeah, plain gluten-free, unfortunately, for me. I mean, it's fortunate in that living in Oregon, it's like, gluten-free bagels exist.
Yeah, totally. I don't think I've ever had one. I'm really like a everything bagel kind of girl. And by everything,
That's
I mean
fair.
like every bagel. Every bagel, just give it to.
Every bagel come my way. I
Yeah.
also like everything bagels, and every bagel except for the one where they put raisins in. No.
Oh yeah, that's bullshit. That's not even a real bagel.
Yeah. It's like I feel like baking raisins into any like thing is just cruel because I always
Should
think
we-
they're chocolate chips, and I'm like, why are you tricking me? Like, I like raisins. I want them in my salad or like a handful of them or in trail mix. I do not want them baked into something. It's just, it's trickery.
Trickery. And speaking of salads, something that I believe should never be included in a salad is a raw mushroom.
Oh, yeah. I think it's like actually like, well, I don't know. I'm going to spread lies and conspiracies, but I think maybe you're not supposed to eat raw mushrooms, but
Yeah, I think it's like low-key poisoning yourself.
yeah,
Anyway,
agreed.
so this is the Playing Possums podcast.
Hey.
I'm one of your hosts, Kacey, and I have a voice for radio and a face for radio. That's what I meant to say.
Oh my God. I do not have a face or voice for any of this, but I'm doing it anyways. And my name is Katherine. And yeah, welcome to our podcast. I am a woodworker, a artist and designer and educator. And we are here to talk about creativity and just what it's like to try to put out your creations into the world and how it can be kind of difficult, but also valuable exercise in becoming a better person. No, I don't know. Yeah,
A better creator, a
Version
better
of
maker.
yourself? Yeah,
Yeah. A more vulnerable version, maybe.
soft,
Or like,
soft
just ready to,
underbelly.
someone ready to take a risk on
Yeah.
themselves, like in a positive way, positive risk.
Yeah.
No risky risk.
Speaking of risk, I know this is not what we're going to talk about today, but so we got an above ground pool, like just like an inflatable pool, and we kept it up like into October, and I was like getting in it, and it was like really cold. But then we had to take it down because Marcia, my wife, was afraid it was going to like freeze and then like break our pool for the summer because we wanted to use it next summer. And so I bought a cattle tank, like a little cattle tank for myself to get into. And I know that like cold dipping is like a big thing in the fitness bro world. And I'm not in that world, but I do love a good cold dip. And I think it's more, I've done it for a long time. Like I was a backpacking guide and I just loved getting in cold water. So I took a risk this morning and I got into my cattle tank. And it was very icy and very cold, but I really liked it and I feel energized. So yeah.
Nice. I honestly this morning just forgot about everything, and I was sitting on my couch in front of the fire when you texted me and you're like, I'm running late. And I was like, I don't even know where I'm supposed to be right now.
That also sounds really like a great way to start your morning. It's just ignore everything.
Yeah, do not look at the calendar.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Well, we're
So
we're
what are we talking?
still missing our co-host,
Yes.
Jamie, who is a painter, and artist from Mississippi. And Jamie and I have known each other for my whole life, and so we've known each other a long time. And he is one of our co-hosts, but he's unavailable right now, because of some crazy house stuff that's going on that he is dealing with. And so we're doing a mini episode with just Kacey and I, and we are going to talk about there is a new book out by a music producer called Rick Rubin, and he's been the last year or so he's been doing some interviews. And I don't read a lot of books. I do audiobooks. I am dyslexic, so reading is not relaxing for me. So I oftentimes take the shortcut and listen to the authors be interviewed. So that's what I did with this book. I do plan to listen to the audio version, but I feel like I got so much out of this interview that I sent you, Kacey. It is the podcast On Being with Krista Tippett, and she interviews Rick Rubin, and they talk about creativity. And we just really liked kind of listening to it, and like it felt like it was brought up a lot of stuff for us that we've been talking about in preparation for doing this podcast. So yeah.
Definitely.
Do you have anything else?
It was my first time listening to Krista's podcast, and I think that she has a really great tendency to get intimate in her interviews in the way of being vulnerable, like emotionally vulnerable with people. And so I think that brought me in really quickly to the conversation and interested in what Rick had to say. Though I think it's a good one to start with anyway when we're starting to talk about creativity, because he's so well known for being influential in our generation for creativity, specifically in music spaces. And as someone that's so successful in their career, one of the first things he says within like 5 or 6 minutes of being on the mic is that he never really knows what he's doing. He's not setting himself up as an expert. He never knows what he's doing. He just knows how he feels, and he goes with it. He just trusts his gut feeling. And I just thought that was, I was kind of flabbergasted, honestly. I was like, it was both relieving and a little bit like an eye roll for me, because I think as creative people, you feel like you need to be somewhat of an authority in how you're making things, but it really takes the pressure off to not feel like you need to be the expert. Like, just knowing how you feel is enough.
Yeah, I think about that a lot, actually. I really like that idea of like sort of creating from how you feel.
Okay.
I spent some time with a mentor recently, and I was talking about this project that I want to create, and I was sort of talking about my ideas, and she was like, "Does it have to be so literal?" And I like looked at her, and I was like, "Oh, like I need to think about," because it's kind of a subject. It's a secret, so I can't tell you. But what I want
was
to
just gonna
create
ask.
is, yeah, what I want to create is, basically it's a sort of a story of why I want to create it. And so she was kind of like leading me to like understand of like, oh, like actually if you come at this design how you feel versus like all this literal stuff you're pulling out of the story, it's gonna be a better design of like, how do you feel when you think about this story? How do you feel like? And so that was really eye-opening for me to be like, oh, like, because I think sometimes I can get really literal and be like, oh, I'm gonna tell this story about this subject, and I'm gonna do something about this subject. And so and I think the things that I like to consume as far as art, like it's like I can almost feel like know what people were feeling when they made it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Kind of interpretation. Interpreting how you're feeling, literally taking maybe those like little segments that might not make sense to create like a holistic kind of I don't know, like I don't know. I'm thinking of like how you would describe like putting something emotional visually, because that, oftentimes emotions aren't necessarily visual, but I think that sounds exactly like what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think about like I love like scientific illustration, but I also really love illustration that's like borderline scientific illustration, but it's not exactly correct. And I feel like it's because, like, if I think about it, especially like sort of stuff before there were photographs, like stuff from the 1700s, 1800s and earlier, is like, and like way earlier, right? Like if you look at like pictographs and all of that kind of stuff, is like, it's like you can kind of tell how the person felt about the animal, and that conveys, versus it being really accurate of like, this is how the animal looks like in a photograph. Of like, if it's not as accurate as it should be, it's like, oh, that's because they're sort of skewing more towards how they felt about it.
Oh, it's really interesting.
I think that's how I interpret it. I don't know if that's true or not for that person, but that there's something about like that comes up for me in those moments where I'm like, oh yeah, like I feel like I can tell that this person was really excited when they saw this animal, or felt a lot of reverence, or felt fear, or whatever, in the way that it's sort of portrayed.
It makes me think of how people look in photographs versus how they look in real life. Like you can see someone in a photograph and then recognize them, but there's like these little differences that like, that looks like you, but it's not you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what you're describing really makes me think about that. And I totally know what you're saying. It's like almost looking at like a cave painting of a horse. And you're like, that's a horse. But then you see a horse in real life. And like, this is like, we really pared it down from what it is to kind of the bare necessities.
Yeah. And I think it kind of goes to like what we were talking about before in the last mini episode, was like, of like what you're, to be able to do realistic drawings is also like a really high skill. And so in some ways, like if you wait until you're able to do that to draw, then you're not able to like create anything. And so it's like, what are the tools that are available to you now, and how can you convey, that creature or that person or whatever it is with the tools you have now, and know that that's okay, versus it having to be this like hyper realistic thing. And like not to say there's anything wrong with having that skill and doing that type of drawing, but I think oftentimes that's where we place the highest value, is like, that's what good art is. And I think oftentimes, and this was the case for me, is like people who are not able to do that in high school, they are pulled out. Like they're like, you're not good at art, don't spend any more time on this, you're never going to be able to draw realistically, so go do math and science. And drawing is like only one way to be creative, right? Like there's people who are very creative musically but can't draw, people who take great photographs, like for me, it's like I'm a mediocre drawer, but I see, like when I work in 3D with woodworking, like that is such a easier medium for me to work in, versus 2D is like a little bit harder for me. And so, but I feel like when I finally let go of that hang up for myself, I actually draw a lot more than I ever did before, because I'm like, I'm not good at this. And then it was like, oh, well, I kind of let go of that. Like, you have to be here in order to even be in the room or be in the space. Is like, you don't, like, how are you going to be in the space of drawing if you have to already be the best at it, sort of?
Well, I think that we give people this like arbitrary timeline of when mastery happens. And I'm thinking back to Rick talking about the 4 stages of making something: the seed phase, the exploration and iteration, and then creation, and then editing and completion. And so, we think about when we're little kids and we're doing whatever with like finger paints or crayons or markers. And that's the thing. And we're proud of it. We're happy with it. We have like our parents put it on the fridge. And then at some point, as we're still in our adolescence, we're expected to have a direction and be good enough at something that makes sense. But we're also not accounting for that other people, or everyone really, is working at their own pace and needs support in different ways. And so we're like, oh, you're not good at this at a young age. And then we put it away and you have to go do something else. You have to try something else. But that really doesn't allow us the incubation of the exploration phase before we're actually creating. And I think that's true both for people and for the work that they're making.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think, this is maybe a little bit sort of moving away from what you were talking about, but I think it has some to do with it of like, I think the other thing that really hit me and like sort of helped me be like, okay, I got to keep making work. It's like he says, the creative flow of the universe is going to continue whether or not you participate in it or not. And it's like, I think all of those kids, right, who get pulled out of the creative flow of the universe, like it keeps going, right? And they keep seeing art and they keep believing that they shouldn't be part of it, right? And versus like, it's all it is it's your choice to participate, right? Like you choose, and like we farm that out of who gets to choose whether or not we participate. And like, I love how he says that. And I feel like it puts it back into the hands of the person of like, hey, like it's your choice whether it's going to happen either way. Like creativity is like, there are people who, live and die from it and they're going to do the work. And so it's going to happen either way, but like you can also be part of it. And that's your choice. It's not anyone else's choice of like whether your work is good, whether, like no one even has to see your work if that's what you want. But which is, kind of what our podcast is about is, you can just make work and play dead like a possum. And then you can, which I've done a lot of my career is like, I make a lot of stuff and then it's really hard for me to show it to anyone. And I think the more I learn and, think about sort of all of these rules I've put on myself is like that this is someone else's definition of what is good, what is technically sound, like all of that versus like me deciding that like this is what I have to say and I have this enough skill that I am ready to say it and that's fine. Like it doesn't have to be more than that. And so I really like that idea. And I think more, the more people that can be exposed to that idea of like, hey, like you have a space in here to be creative. It's your choice whether to take that step. It's not anyone else's choice.
Right. And I think what you're saying and kind of what you were gleaning from what Rick was saying in the interview is that we're taking it away from it being this one person, their identity that we see when we're growing up, like, oh, there's the person that's really great at running or the person that's really great at drawing or, insert anything and that's their identity, and being like, there's room for everybody. And the universe isn't going to just drop all of the creative ideas on the one kid in high school that was really great at drawing and maybe didn't pursue like STEM fields and stayed in humanities. And maybe that it leaves room for evolution and inclusion, and I appreciate that. Is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that of like yeah, and I think too, like what Rick talks about is like the different stages of creativity of like, especially at the beginning being play and exploration is like, that's a place you can stay for a long time, you know, and you don't have to necessarily come out of that to finish something unless, you know, it's something that you are doing to monetarily support yourself. You know, and or that like, I mean, I think there's also a, you know, and a drive to finish something, which I clearly lack and wish that I had more. I know you have a really good drive to finish stuff, and that's something else that kind of I gleaned from the interview is like, oh, I wonder if there's people who feel more comfortable in the different stages of like I feel very comfortable in play and exploration, and as soon as that's done, I'm like next, and then I'll leave a project like very much half finished because I've solved all the problems that I wanted to solve, or I played as much as I wanted to play, and then I'm like, and so getting to the end is really a struggle for me. I see a lot of people that really want the finished product, and like I try to pull them into the play and exploration phase, and that feels very uncomfortable for them because they're like, well, I just am ready to finish this. And so I've been learning of like, oh, well, it's also okay to finish, and like finding that balance.
Totally. And I feel like I'm afflicted with that need to finish a lot of times and feel uncomfortable in the play phase. Though it's something that I want to do more, because I realize the more you give yourself time to explore, the more creative ideas you can come up with. But yeah, I get really stuck in this like, okay, we're gonna do a project, and I need to finish it now. Like I need to know what it's gonna look like now. But I often find that most of my best creative problem solving comes from when I'm in the moment trying to figure out what the next step is. And yeah, I think so Katherine and I are working on a project for my day job together, because it's a woodworking project and I'm not anywhere near a woodworking expert, but we're working with this slab, and Katherine is throwing out ideas of like what we should do with this slab, and I keep being like, yes, we'll do it. That's the thing. Let's just keep like, you know, fire up the saw. We're gonna move on the idea. And I think that's an interesting dynamic working with you, is just how our different styles are coming together to make something, you know, since we are so good in the different stages in our own ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, to hear that reflected back, because I think I do overwhelm people sometimes by giving them so many options. But to me, that feels really good. And so but I think I do, like, I'm like, you know, people will be like, how can I do this? And I mean, in woodworking, there's so many ways to do things. And so I'm like, I give them like 5 different ways, and they're like, can you just tell me how to do it? And I'm like, well, do you want to use this saw, or do you want to, you know, like what do you want to do? And then I think sometimes people just want more direction. And so that's, you know, that's helpful for me to know, is like sometimes people are just in that finishing stage. And for me, I feel so comfortable in the play stage that it's like, I don't always recognize when someone's in that stage of just, okay, I'm at this point where we're just moving this along. Yeah.
I think it's also like there's a language to creation and like the different mediums that sometimes you know, being in the play stage and in the seeded stage, if you're not there, or you're actually trying to be there, you might be missing out on a vernacular that's important to communicating with people that you're collaborating with. For example, when we were talking about breaking down that slab to get rid of the bow, you're saying we could rip it. And I'm thinking like, what the hell does that mean? And but it's also like I was like in the stage of like, okay, I have this amount of time. I need to like make the thing happen. And so I wasn't I wasn't allowing myself time to explore, like learn in a way that would also maybe make it easier to collaborate on something, because I know what I want, but I don't know how to do the point A to point B. Like I hadn't discovered that pathway yet.
Yeah. 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 And I think especially this is something like I love learning and like I feel very comfortable being completely in the dark, sort of, like, if that makes sense, like of like where it's like I know like I am taking this garment sewing class, like it's like a tailoring class, like we're making a blazer, and it's like I have only ever made like one pair of pajama pants, which is like the basic sewing. And so all of the language is like way over my head, and I just know that I will know that when I need to know it, right? Like at this point, I'm so green that like it doesn't even matter if I know what that stitch that they're talking about means, because I'm not doing it at this point. And when I get to that point, it will become available. And I try to share that with people in the shop too, of like, hey, like I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you. And some of it is actually like, you're not going to even know that you need to know this until like a really long time from now. But I'm telling you now because then in that moment, a really long time from now, you'll be like, you will know it sort of because it will be there. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's sort of like you're absorbing stuff while you're learning, but you're only absorbing what you can, what your capacity is, right? And so it's like when you're first learning, your capacity is really small because you're still trying to figure out what the environment is. Like you're getting comfortable with all that stuff, and then as you learn, your capacity grows. And so then, like I feel very much that way. Same with like Marcia and I are taking guitar and voice lessons, and I do not know what she's doing when she plays the piano and tells us what notes to sing. I'm just like trying my best, and it's like it is slowly, my capacity is slowly growing to be able to understand what she's doing. And it's like being relaxed enough to know that that's the learning process allows you to not worry about the details that don't matter to you right now. And that's, like I think that's a really valuable way to learn versus like I have a lot of people, because woodworking is so technical, that are like, wait, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And it's like, none of this matters. Like at this point, you don't have the capacity to understand it. So, and it's like, I understand why they're asking, but it's like, there's something, if you can, when you're learning, to relax in not knowing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think it's like a really applicable idea, because another one of the points that I thought was really inspiring that Rick said in the interview was that there's great wisdom in ignorance. Yeah, like when you know too much, maybe that's going to ultimately cripple the creative process. Yeah, like I think, I mean, if I were to like bring it back to guitar, because one of my like relaxing, getting off my phone activities is playing my acoustic guitar. And I think I enjoy it the most when I'm not thinking, and it just is like a free form kind of thing. My fingers are doing things and then it's making noise. But the second I start thinking about it, I'm like, is that in the major scale? Is this actually part of like the minor pentatonic scale? And then I'm like, oh, that's not right. I hit the wrong chord. Like ultimately it doesn't really matter, because the point is not to create something that's like technically perfect. The point is that you're creating something that makes you feel good, or to express how you're feeling, or we're talking about self-actualization, and it's like if you do everything to the nth degree of technical perfection, how is that holding you back from actualizing what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I love that. I think I'm going to use that when I'm teaching. If like there's great wisdom in ignorance, because I think it's really true. And actually, he says this in the podcast. He talks about the computer that plays chess or whatever, and that in the moment, the computer does this thing in the chess game where all the chess players are like, "Oh, this is wrong. It's breaking or like it was breaking, like maybe not necessarily. It wasn't doing a move that he couldn't do,
rule.
but it was a social rule." And the guy like walked away, and then he finally came back, and they finished the game, and the computer won. And like Rick Rubin was saying, like he was so emotional about that, and he couldn't figure out why. And then he realized it was not because like, oh, we're making these great technical advances. It was because it's like the computer was basically creative. And I think there's these two, like it's kind of like a curve of like when you're in your craft is like there you don't know enough to break the rules, and then you know enough to break the rules. So if you think about like a classically trained musician who does jazz, right? Like they know enough where they're breaking the rules, and they're, and then there's another, you come at it from the other angle where you don't know anything and you don't know any of the rules. And so you're like, is this possible? And I think when you're learning and you're in an environment where you have access to somebody who knows enough to break the rules, then you can do that. And sometimes, right, like people just come and they're drawing or they're doing things that aren't as technical, and you don't need help to do those, and you can break the rules, right? Like musicians do that all the time, things like that. I particularly teach something that's like kind of dangerous. So it's like, you don't want to break certain rules. But it's like, I think I have a lot of people that are like, is this possible? And like my first instinct is like, no. And then I have to think about it, and it's like, oh, actually, yeah, that is possible, and we can figure out how to help you do that. And it's because they're coming at it because they have no idea what's possible, and so they're just guessing. And I think there's something really creative about that.
Definitely. I think it's been interesting in this conversation. We're talking about both the evolution of an artist and their abilities and way to express themselves, and also the evolution of a project.
Totally. Well, I know you have to wrap up, and I'm glad we had this time to chat. So
Me too.
Yeah, if you are excited about hearing more of our podcasts, there will be more, and you can subscribe, and you can also follow us on Instagram at playing.possum.collective. So yeah, follow us there too, and let us know what you think.
Yeah, see you next time.
All right, bye.